All right, folks, get ready for a deep dive. We're taking a look at local development plans today.
Not exactly a front-page thriller, right?
Well, stick with us. This one gets interesting, I promise. We're talking ancient settlements, eco-buzzwords, you name it.
It's a case study, really. History, nature, ambition, all rolled into one.
And we've got two 11-year-olds leading the charge, Kesser and Steen.
They've been digging deep for their Nature and Innovation project with their professor, Mr. Hendricks.
And they found some interesting stuff, haven't they?
Let's just say the developers are promising an ecotopia, but the reality, well, it's a bit different.
So we're going to sort through all the claims, the paperwork, the whole shebang, starting with a trip back in time. Way back. We're talking Stone Age.
Højbjerg Woods. It sits on what used to be a group of islands way back after the last ice age. And in those hills, archaeologists found settlements, Stone Age settlements.
A long history, huh?
Yeah.
And get this. They found fish bones, really well-preserved ones, in the old garbage dumps.
The middens, yes.
Not exactly a glamorous find, but it tells us something.
It does. For years, everyone thought these early settlers only ate shellfish. But these fish bones, they tell a different story.
They were going out further, catching bigger fish. More sophisticated than we thought.
Exactly.
So Stone Age settlements, an ancient fishery, and now a modern development that might pave over it all.
Makes you think, doesn't it, about how we balance progress and preservation.
Big questions, for sure. But let's shift gears a bit. Fast forward a few thousand years. To the current development plans. This is where things get a little interesting.
The developers, they pitched this project as the ultimate eco-friendly haven. Grass roofs, wood cladding, solar panels, the works.
Eco-friendly bingo, right?
Much.
But Kesser and Steen, they kept digging. And what they found is those plans, they changed. Adjustments were made. The administration granted dispensations.
And now they're claiming this development is greener than the Amazon rainforest.
That's a bit much, isn't it?
A bit, yeah.
And then there's this whole vanishing forest business. Except, here's the thing. The forest never actually vanished.
It's where things get complicated. Biologists have classified parts of Højbjerg Woods as forest, officially, so the development's planned to stop it from becoming forest.
Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
No, not really. But there are specific criteria for what defines a forest, right?
Tree cover, tree height, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And based on those criteria, Højbjerg Woods fits the bill, at least in parts.
So they're trying to save a forest from being a forest while developing it at the same time.
Right.
And then the size of this development, it keeps changing.
It does, doesn't it?
First 46 dwellings, then over 60. Finally, they landed on 51.
A reduction, they say.
But still more than the original plan.
And throughout all of this, property prices kept going up.
Makes you wonder what's really driving these decisions.
It does.
And speaking of decisions, let's talk about the wildlife. We're not just talking about a few squirrels being displaced.
No, we're talking protected species. The great crested newt, for one. And frogs, toads, snakes, the whole ecosystem.
A lot of life in Højbjerg Woods.
A lot of life. And the development, well, it doesn't seem to have taken that into account.
Especially with those buffer zones around the water.
They started at 18 meters.
Then down to 9.
Now it's just 8.
And on top of that, they were going to build a community building over the water.
Saying the animals could crawl around underneath.
It's a bit absurd, isn't it?
A bit. Thankfully, that plan seems to have disappeared. But the concern for the wildlife, that remains.
And it makes you think, doesn't it, about how we prioritize human convenience over the needs of the natural world.
It does. And often those needs are more intertwined than we realize. Back again with more on Højbjerg Woods. Last time we left off with those wildlife concerns.
Yeah, it wasn't looking too good for the local critters.
And the deeper we go, the more we find those concerns. Just the beginning, really.
But before we get to the water worries, can we go back to that vanishing forest thing? It's been bugging me.
It's a good example of how words can be. Well, misleading. Biologists have already said parts of Højbjerg Woods are forest, officially.
So trying to stop it from becoming forest is just weird.
It is, isn't it? But let's break down this forest definition. Tree cover, tree height. What kind of trees are we talking about?
Does a forest of saplings count the same as a forest of, like, giant oaks?
Good point. And it's something the developers don't seem to be addressing. Those trees didn't appear overnight. It's a process. Succession, it's called.
Nature's been working on this forest for a while then.
It has. And now the developers are saying, nope, we've got a better idea.
An idea that doesn't seem to put the environment first.
Unfortunately, that seems to be the case. And it's not just the trees. Kesser and Steen noticed something else. There's no maintenance plan for the green spaces.
Maintenance plan. Sounds a bit dry.
Maybe, but it's important. It outlines how those green spaces are managed, cared for. Without one, things can go wrong quickly.
So like a garden with no gardener, weeds everywhere, chaos.
Exactly. And then you have invasive species taking root, spreading. We've already seen those buffer zones shrink. No maintenance plan just makes it worse.
Invasive species.
Yeah.
They're like the uninvited guests that wreck the party.
A good analogy. And Kesser and Steen have already seen it happening. Plants like goldenrod, broom dots spreading from the pond up towards the hills.
Well, the new owner's worried about invasives, ironically.
It is ironic, isn't it? It's a case of saying one thing, doing another. Those plants are already there, spreading. And no plan to manage them. Not a good sign.
Back to those eco-friendly promises, too. Remember those? They changed. Dispensations were granted.
Quietly altered, you could say.
Like ordering a veggie burger and finding out it was cooked on the same grill as the bacon.
Not exactly what you expected.
And it makes you wonder who's really calling the shots here. Is it the community or the developer's bottom line?
A valid question.
Speaking of bottom lines, that development size, always changing.
46 dwellings, then over 60, now 51.
A classic bait and switch, right? Start low, raise it later.
Seems that way. And remember, as the size went up and down, property prices kept climbing.
So it's not just about building homes. It's about profit.
It seems that profit is a major factor, yes.
And the environment. The community's concerns. They take a back seat.
It raises a question, doesn't it? How do we balance development and protecting what we have?
It's complicated. But Højbjerg Woods shows us how important it is to be informed, to dig deeper, ask questions, hold people accountable.
And that's what Kesser and Steen have been doing. They found inconsistencies, raised concerns that were mostly ignored by those in charge.
11 years old,
Yep.
and they're already showing us how it's done.
They are. They've shown that even local development plans can have a big impact on the environment, on our future.
It's citizen science in action. It reminds us that we all have a role to play.
We do in shaping our communities, our planet.
So we've got the history, the tactics, the ecological impact, but there's more to this story.
There is. In the last part of our deep dive, we'll look at the water system specifically and the role of the agencies meant to protect it.
We're back, folks. Final part of our deep dive into Højbjerg Woods. We've covered a lot of ground. History, ecology, some pretty questionable developer tactics.
And now we're diving into the water, literally. Because the water worries here, they run deep.
Deeper than a few displaced newts.
Much deeper. This isn't just about the pond in Højbjerg Woods. It's about the whole interconnected water system, the ecosystem, the community. It all relies on clean water.
What happens upstream affects everything downstream, as they say.
Exactly. And here, the potential for negative impacts downstream. Significant, to say the least.
Let's talk about those buffer zones again. Around the pond, they started at 18 meters.
A decent buffer.
Then down to 9.
Getting smaller.
And now, a measly 8 meters.
Not much protection at all. Which means anything running off from the development, fertilizers, road salt, pollutants, straight into the pond.
In that pond, it's not just some isolated puddle.
It's connected to the groundwater, the same groundwater that supplies the city's drinking water.
So polluting the pond is basically polluting the city's water supply.
Essentially, yes. And we're not just talking about taste. Contaminated groundwater can have serious health consequences.
This isn't just about the environment anymore. It's about public health.
Exactly. And then there's the fjord. The developers want to channel excess water from the pond into the stream that feeds into the fjord.
So now we've got potential groundwater contamination, the pond ecosystem at risk, and the fjord too.
It's a chain reaction.
A whole cascade of potential problems. And it all comes back to those regulatory agencies. Are they doing enough to protect all of this?
That's the big question, isn't it? They're supposed to be the safeguards, making sure development doesn't destroy the environment.
But in Højbjerg Woods, it seems like the developers have found ways around the rules. Dispensations, altered plans, pushing the limits.
And that raises questions, doesn't it? Are the regulations strong enough? Are they being enforced?
It's like having speed limits, but no one to actually give out tickets.
A good analogy. And that's why people like Kesser and Steen are so important.
They're the ones asking the tough questions, digging deeper, holding people accountable.
And they've shown that you don't have to be an adult to make a difference.
They're inspiring, really.
They are. They've highlighted the power of citizen science, the importance of local engagement, And they've shown us that these local development plans, they matter. They have a real impact.
On the environment, on our future.
On all of us, ultimately.
So there you have it. Højbjerg Woods, a case study in how complex these issues can be.
History, ecology, development, politics, it's all intertwined.
And it shows that we need to be informed, engaged, and ready to ask those tough questions.
Because the choices we make today, they have consequences tomorrow.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious. Today we're taking a look at something pretty special, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, so usually, we take a look at scientific reports, white papers, that kind of thing.
Right.
But this one is actually, it's a report. But it's by a couple of young boys.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Kesser and Steen.
Okay.
They're from Denmark, and they've been paying really close attention to their local environment there.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into their observations, see what they've noticed, what they've found.
All right, I'm interested to see what these young minds have come up with.
I think you'll be pretty impressed, actually.
Oh, okay.
So one of the things that they noticed right off the bat was the spread of certain plants in their area.
Okay.
Particularly things like goldenrod and broom.
Huh.
And, maybe to the untrained eye, you just see some plants.
Right.
But they dug a little deeper. And they realized that these are actually invasive species.
Oh, that's interesting. So they were able to identify them as being non-native.
Yeah, and they even pinpointed certain areas.
Right.
Like there's a pond on this street, Konvalvej Street.
Okay.
And then kind of southeast of that towards like a daycare center.
Wow.
They're seeing like a lot of these plants popping up.
And that's really insightful because invasive species, as you mentioned, can really disrupt the natural balance of an ecosystem.
Right.
They often don't have natural predators in their new environment.
Yeah.
Which allows them to spread unchecked and outcompete the native plants that are supposed to be there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they also kind of point out that it seems like there isn't a lot of planning around managing the green spaces in their area.
Okay.
And they're a little cynical about it. They're like, are the new owners really invested in tackling these invasive species?
Right.
Or is there something else going on?
It's a good question, and their skepticism is something to consider.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes focusing on a highly visible issue like invasive species can be a way to deflect attention from other more complex or potentially controversial problems.
This is like putting a Band-Aid on something.
Exactly.
I need surgery.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is they actually compare this situation to the emperor's new clothes.
Oh, wow.
Which is a really interesting analogy because it suggests that there's this disconnect between what's being said and what's actually happening on the ground. Like everyone's pretending there's a solution, but is anything really being done?
Yeah, it makes me think of like those companies that make all these claims about being eco-friendly.
Greenwashing.
Yeah, but then behind the scenes, they're not really following through.
Exactly. And it's a concern we need to be aware of, not just in environmental issues, but in many areas of life.
Yeah.
It's important to look beyond the surface and really question whether the proposed solutions are actually addressing the root causes of the problem.
And Kesser and Steen are urging us to do just that. To not just take things at face value, but to really dig deeper and question things.
To be critical thinkers.
Yeah. Now, another thing that they observed that I thought was really interesting was they were talking about fauna passages.
Oh, those wildlife crossings.
Yeah. And, you often hear about those as being like a solution.
Yes.
To help animals, safely cross highways and things.
It's a great idea in theory.
Right. But they were actually pretty skeptical about the effectiveness of those.
Really?
Yeah, particularly along the highway that they were observing.
So they're saying that they don't think those passages are actually working as intended?
It seems like they don't think that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And that's a valid point, because while fauna passages are designed with the best intentions, their effectiveness really depends on a lot of different factors.
Okay.
Things like the design of the passage itself.
Okay.
Its placement in relation to the surrounding landscape.
Okay.
And even the types of animals.
That it's intended for.
So maybe it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. And it sounds like Kesser and Steen's observations suggest that in their local context, these particular fauna passages might not be achieving their intended goal.
And that's kind of a worrying thing.
It is.
To think about. Because if even these infrastructure projects, that are designed with good intentions, if they can have unintended consequences, what does that mean?
Right.
For, managing our green spaces effectively.
Yeah, it really underscores the need to think holistically and to consider the potential impacts of our actions on the entire ecosystem.
He can't just focus on one thing and ignore the rest.
Exactly. And this actually ties back to another observation that Kesser and Steen made in their report.
Okay.
They talk about the interconnectedness of ecosystems.
Okay.
And how decisions made in one area can have ripple effects elsewhere.
Right.
And they even use this example of ragwort.
Okay, I've heard of that.
It's a plant that's loved by butterfly enthusiasts.
But feared by horse owners.
Oh, why is that?
Because it's toxic to horses.
Oh, okay.
So it's a real-life example of the complexities of managing natural spaces.
You got these competing interests.
Exactly. On the one hand, you want to support pollinators like butterflies.
Right.
But on the other hand, you need to protect livestock.
And what do?
It's a tough one, and it highlights the importance of considering the needs of all stakeholders.
Right.
Maybe there are ways to manage ragwort that benefit both butterflies and horses.
Like what?
Well, perhaps designated areas for each.
Okay.
Or careful monitoring and control measures.
So you can kind of have it both ways.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Yeah. Now, amidst all this concern that they have, there's also this glimmer of pride in their report.
Okay.
They talk about this unique fungus.
Oh, wow.
That's found only in their area of Denmark.
Oh, wow.
They think it might even be rare in Europe as a whole.
That's pretty special.
And they also mention some other unique plants that are specific to Denmark, although they say that they're not very well maintained.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool that they have this sense of pride.
Yeah, I love that. And it really speaks to the importance of biodiversity and endemism.
Endemism.
Which is the existence of species that are found only in specific locations.
Okay.
Like that unique fungus they mentioned.
Right.
Even if it seems insignificant. It plays a role in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
And losing it would be like losing a piece of Denmark's natural heritage.
It's like losing a piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
And it makes you realize that protecting the environment isn't just about these grand gestures.
Right.
It's also about paying attention to those small and unique elements.
Absolutely.
That make up the bigger picture.
And it's about empowering individuals, even young ones like Kesser and Steen,
right,
to observe, to question, and to speak up about their environment.
Because they have a voice.
They absolutely do.
So if Kesser and Steen, these two observant boys, can spark a conversation about environmental issues in their community,
right,
what can you do to raise awareness in yours? What's one small action that you can take today? Whether it's planting native species, reducing your carbon footprint, or simply educating yourself about local environmental challenges, their story is a powerful reminder that everyone has a role to play in protecting our planet.
Absolutely.